She cooked his meals, cleaned his mess, and lived in a house where she felt like a servant, even though she was his wife. But behind the scenes, she was building something he never saw coming, the day she'd own everything, including the home he lorded over her. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more stories like this. The smell of bleach filled my nose as I knelt on the cold marble floor, scrubbing at a stubborn wine stain. My fingers ached from hours of work, but I kept moving, my rag going in slow circles. The long hallway of the Carter estate stretched before me, polished portraits lining the walls, each one a frozen reminder of a family I had married into but never truly belonged to. It was supposed to be my home. I was supposed to be a wife here, not a maid. Emily! Richard's sharp voice echoed from the other end of the hall. I flinched, tightening my grip on the rag before slowly standing. My knees cracked, and my apron, an old one I'd found in the laundry room, was damp with soapy water. Yes, I called back, forcing my voice to sound light. He strode toward me, tall and broad-shouldered, his suit pressed so perfectly it could have come straight from a catalogue. He stopped just short of me, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of bleach. I told you we have guests tonight. This place should already be spotless, he said, his eyes flicking to the bucket at my side. And what's this? Still on the floors? It's almost 4. I'm almost done, I murmured. Just this hallway and the dining room. He gave a short laugh, one of those laughs without warmth. You know, sometimes I forget you're my wife. You're more like the help. Maybe I should start paying you an hourly wage. Or maybe not, since you get free room and board. His words landed like little knives in my chest. I swallowed them down, like I always did. If I reacted, he'd smirk. If I cried, he'd call me dramatic. I just want the house to look nice, I said softly. He glanced at me again, this time with that expression I had come to dread, the one that looked right through me, like I wasn't worth seeing. Well, then work faster. And make sure the wine in the cellar is arranged by label. The Thompsons are wine snobs, and I don't need you embarrassing me. I bit the inside of my cheek. He wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, he'd been charming, telling me I was the most beautiful thing in the world. But that was before the wedding, before I moved into his family's estate, before he started leaving me out of his business dinners and treating me like I was part of the furniture. When he turned to leave, I whispered under my breath, "One day, you'll be working for me." I didn't expect him to hear, and thankfully he didn't. He disappeared down the hall, phone pressed to his ear, barking instructions to someone else. I knelt back down and dipped the rag into the bucket, but my mind was far from the marble floor. In my tiny workspace upstairs, a closet I had converted into an office, I had a secret. For the past 3 years, I had been running an online business selling handmade home decor and vintage finds. I never told Richard. Every order, every sale went into an account only I could access. It wasn't much at first. But now it was a number large enough to make my breath catch whenever I saw it. A number that could change everything. I didn't know exactly when I would use it, but I knew this much: I would not die as the maid in my own marriage. The east wing of the house always felt different. The ceilings were lower, the air colder, and the smell, an odd mix of dust and polished wood, seemed thicker here. Richard almost never came down this way, except for one room, the study. It had a heavy oak door with a brass handle, and unlike the rest of the house, this door was always locked. When I first moved in, I thought it was just where he kept important business files. But lately, I'd noticed him spending more and more time in there. Sometimes for hours. Sometimes late into the night. That morning, while dusting the shelves in the hallway, I heard voices inside the study. Richard's voice was low, urgent. "No, we can't delay any longer. You promised me it would be handled. The creditors are circling." He stopped suddenly, as if sensing movement outside. I froze. My duster hovered in midair. The doorknob rattled, then the door cracked open. Richard stood there, phone in hand, his eyes narrowing at me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Dusting," I said quickly. "It's my job," isn't it? I tried to make it sound like a joke, but my voice shook just enough to give me away. He looked at me for a long second, then stepped out, pulling the door shut behind him. Stay out of this room, Emily. It's not for you. I frowned. It's just a room, Richard. Why so secretive? His lips curved into that cold, thin smile. Because some rooms have ghosts you don't want to wake. The way he said it made the hairs on my arms rise. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words kept replaying in my head. Ghosts. Circling creditors. I sat up in bed, listening. Around midnight, I heard the floorboards creak. Richard's footsteps, heading down the hall toward the east wing. Then silence. I slipped out of bed, bare feet cold against the hardwood, and padded quietly after him. I stopped just before the corner, close enough to see the glow of light spilling from under the study door. I crouched, tilting my head to peek through the thin gap where the door didn't quite meet the frame. My breath caught. Inside, Richard sat at his desk, papers spread everywhere. I saw red seals on some documents, official-looking, maybe legal. He ran a hand through his hair, looking nothing like the confident man he showed the world. On the phone, his voice was tight. I can't let her find out. If Emily knows, it's over. Just give me another month. I pulled back before I could hear more. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid he would hear it. Why couldn't I know? What was he hiding? And what did he mean by if Emily knows, it's over? The next morning, I tried to act normal. At breakfast, I placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. He was scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. You're quiet today, I said, testing him. Busy day, he replied shortly. What kind of busy? I asked lightly. He shot me a look, his fork pausing mid-A. The kind that's none of your business. I smiled, just enough to hide the sting. Everything's my business in this house, Richard. His eyes narrowed. Not everything. Remember that. We finished breakfast in silence. That afternoon, I was in the garden, pruning roses, when Thomas Gray, the estate's groundskeeper, approached. He was an older man with skin like leather from years in the sun. He'd worked here since Richard was a boy, and though he rarely spoke about it, I suspected he knew more about the Carter family than anyone else. Morning, Mrs. Carter, he said, removing his cap. Morning, Thomas, I replied, snipping a thorny stem. These roses are out of control. He gave a short chuckle, then glanced toward the east wing. You've been here a few years now. You ever notice how Mr. Carter keeps that study locked? I froze. Why do you ask? He hesitated. Let's just say, he spends a lot of time in there lately. More than usual. And I've seen his father do the same. Back before, he stopped, clearing his throat. Well, I just hope you're careful, Something in his tone made my stomach twist. Careful of what? He met my eyes for a long moment. Money trouble has a way of making people dangerous. Then he tipped his cap and walked away, leaving me with a pair of pruning shears and a head full of questions. That evening, as I dusted the shelves in the upstairs library, my mind kept circling back to the study, to the red-sealed papers, to the words Richard spoke on the phone. The study wasn't just a room. It was a locked door to the truth. And I had a feeling that whatever was behind it could change everything. I didn't know it then, but I was right. Dead right. The attic of the Carter estate was the kind of place that made you sneeze just by looking at it. Dust motes floated in the light from the one small window, and the air was thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten time. I had no real reason to be there that afternoon, at least not one Richard would approve of. Officially, I was tidying up for the estate's spring cleaning. Unofficially, I was following a gut feeling I couldn't shake. Thomas's warning about money trouble kept echoing in my head. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I figured the attic, where Richard never went, might hold answers. I pushed aside a stack of faded Christmas decorations and an ancient rocking horse, my fingers brushing against something hard and rectangular beneath an old quilt. A ledger. It was thick, leather-bound, and far heavier than it looked. The edges were frayed, and the first few pages were yellowed with age. My heart thudded as I opened it. The handwriting wasn't Richard's. It was older, neater, almost elegant. And the name inside, written in looping script, was Edward Carter, Richard's father. At first, it looked like ordinary financial records, land purchases, equipment orders, payroll. But then I noticed strange codes in the margins, letters and numbers that didn't match any accounting I'd seen. Some entries were scratched out. Others were written in red ink. I turned page after page, my curiosity growing until I found a final entry at the very back, dated only weeks before Edward's death. It read, "Transfer complete. Debt erased. Papers in the study." The study. The locked room. I didn't hear the footsteps at first. It was only when a shadow fell across the attic hatch that I looked up. Thomas stood there, cap in hand. "Didn't mean to scare you, I quickly closed the ledger. "It's fine. Just cleaning." His gaze lingered on the book in my lap, but he said nothing. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "That book. You might want to be careful. Mr. Carter Sr. wasn't a man you wanted to cross." I raised a brow. "You knew him well." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Well enough. And I know the son learned a few tricks from the father." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how heavy the ledger felt in my hands. "Tricks like what?" Thomas gave a small shake of his head. "Not my place to say. Just, remember, people with secrets tend to guard them with teeth." Before I could ask more, he was gone, leaving me alone with the dust and the words I couldn't unread. That night, I sat in my tiny hidden office, a closet I'd converted with a desk, a lamp, and the old laptop Richard thought was broken. My secret business dashboard glowed on the screen, numbers dancing in green. 3 years of work. Late nights after Richard went to bed. Orders shipped in brown paper packages from the post office in town. Every penny saved. I pulled up my account balance. The number at the bottom made my chest tighten. Enough to buy land. Maybe even a small property. For months, I'd been toying with the idea of expanding, of getting a place of my own. But now, looking at the ledger in front of me and remembering Richard's phone call about creditors, an idea began to form. Dangerous. Thrilling. Unshakable. I opened my email and typed out a message to an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Jane Whitmore. Jane had always been sharp, ambitious, a little ruthless. She went into real estate after graduation and, according to the occasional social media update, had become something of a shark. If anyone could help me move quietly, it was her. Subject: opportunity. Jane. It's been a long time. I have a business proposition for you, something big, but it needs to be handled quietly. Call me. I hesitated, then hit send. Jane called the next afternoon. "Emily Carter," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered, smooth, confident, with the faintest edge. "It's been what, 9 years? What's this about a big opportunity?" I glanced around to make sure Richard wasn't home. "I need to buy a property. Discreetly. Through someone else's name." A pause. "That's intriguing. May I ask why?" I took a breath. "Because the seller is my husband. And he can't know it's me." Jane let out a low whistle. "Okay, now I'm interested. Tell me everything." We spoke for over an hour. I told her about the locked study, the overheard phone calls, the ledger. I told her about my hidden business and the money I'd saved. And then I told her my plan, to buy the estate out from under him the moment he decided to sell. "That's bold," Jane said at last. "And risky. But if he's in debt and the creditors are pressing, he might let it go cheap. I could set up a shell corporation, act as a buyer, and transfer it to you later." My heart raced. "You'd really do that?" "Emily," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I've been waiting my whole career for a deal this delicious." That evening, Richard came home late, smelling faintly of whiskey. He dropped his jacket over a chair and poured himself another drink. "Long day?" I asked. He didn't look at me. "You could say that. My partners are useless. Dead weight." Sounds frustrating. It is. But I'll figure it out. I always do. He took a slow sip, then glanced at me. "Why are you smiling?" I hadn't realized I was. "Just thinking about how resourceful you are," I lied. He gave a short laugh. "Don't try to flatter me, Emily. It's not your strong suit." Maybe not, I thought. But revenge? That, I was learning, could be. The first real crack appeared over breakfast. Richard was seated at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone as I set down his coffee. He didn't even glance up, just muttered, "Out of cream again? You've got to stay on top of these things, Emily." "We're not out of cream," I said. "You just used the last of it yesterday." He gave a dry chuckle. "Excuses. You know, a good maid anticipates problems before they happen." I smiled thinly. "Good thing I'm not the maid, then." His eyes flicked up from his phone, sharp. "Aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The moment stretched just long enough to make him uncomfortable, and that was a small victory I savored. Later that day, I was dusting the grand staircase when I heard him in the study, shouting into the phone. "No, I told you, I can't make that payment yet. Do you want me to default?" "No, listen, I have assets. I'll sell something. The house if I have to." "Yes, the house." My heart skipped. My pulse was in my ears. He was going to sell. Sooner than I thought. I crept closer, stopping just around the corner where the hallway met the study door. I couldn't see him, but I could hear every word. "Look, I'll get the papers drawn up this week. I've got a buyer in mind. Private. No brokers." I froze. Private buyer. He was already thinking about who he could trust to take it off his hands quickly. He had no idea that I was about to put myself in that exact spot. That evening, Jane called. "His selling," I whispered as soon as I answered. "He just said it on the phone." "That's perfect," she said. "Here's what we'll do. I'll create an LLC, make it look like I'm representing a small investment firm. I'll put in an offer slightly under market, but all cash. He'll jump at it if he's desperate enough." "What if he has someone else in mind?" I asked. "Then we make him believe we're the safer choice," Jane replied without hesitation. "Desperate men choose security over loyalty." When Richard came to bed that night, I pretended to be asleep. He lay down heavily, the mattress dipping under his weight. I could smell the faint scent of cigar smoke in his hair. "Somewhere in the dark," he sighed. Not the tired sigh of a man after a long day, but the low, heavy sigh of someone who was running out of road. It should have made me pity him. It didn't. 2 weeks later, I was in the kitchen wiping down the counters when Richard strolled in, a manila envelope under his arm. He looked lighter somehow. Triumphant. "Good news," he said. "I found a buyer." I kept my back to him, letting my hands keep moving over the countertop. "That's quick." "Who?" "Private firm," he said. "Anonymous investors. Doesn't matter who they are, really. All cash. No banks. Easy deal." Inside, I was smiling so hard I thought my ribs might crack. Out loud, I only said, "Sounds like you're getting exactly what you wanted." He poured himself a coffee. "I am. It's the start of a new chapter. And for you, well, we'll find somewhere smaller. Something you can actually manage." I turned then, meeting his eyes. "And you think I can't manage this house?" He smirked. "Emily, you can barely manage breakfast." I didn't answer. Just filed that away as one more insult I'd repay in full. The day he signed the contract, he came home and tossed the pen on the table like it was a trophy. "Done," he said, leaning back with that smug smile I'd come to loathe. "In a month, this place will be someone else's problem." In another room across town, Jane was holding the very same contract, already grinning like the cat that got the cream. "You own it now," she told me over the phone that night. "Technically, the LLC does, but give it 30 days and we'll transfer the deed into your name." I sat there in my hidden office, staring at the printed copy she'd sent me. My name wasn't anywhere on it, but I knew. And that was enough. The next morning, I walked through the house with new eyes. My eyes. Every painting, every chandelier, every carved banister, mine. He didn't know it yet, but every room he stepped into, every floor he walked on, belonged to me now. In the east wing, I stopped at the study door. He'd locked it as always. But soon, very soon, I'd have the keys. And when I did, I'd open it for the last time, and see every ghost he tried to keep from me. Richard loved hosting dinners almost as much as he loved hearing himself talk. The dining room was lit with golden chandeliers that reflected off the polished mahogany table. The silverware gleamed, the crystal glasses sparkled, and the air smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted lamb. To the guests, this was just another Carter dinner party. To me, it was the night everything changed. "Emily, keep the wine flowing," Richard murmured to me as I passed, as if I were a waitress. "Of course," I said, my smile steady, my heartbeat quickening. Around the table sat 8 people, business associates, their spouses, and the Thompsons, his longtime friends and wine snobs. Richard was in his element, laughing loudly, telling the same stories I'd heard 100 times. Halfway through the main course, he cleared his throat and tapped his glass. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice booming with pride. "As many of you know, I'm a man who knows when to seize opportunity. And sometimes, that means knowing when to let go of the past." He spread his arms, gesturing to the room. "I've sold the estate." There was a collective murmur of surprise. Mrs. Thompson gasped. "Richard, this place is your family legacy." "Legacies don't pay bills," he said with a chuckle. "I found a buyer, private firm, cash deal. I'll be moving on to bigger things." "Smaller," I murmured under my breath. "What was that?" he asked, catching my eye. I only smiled sweetly. "Nothing at all." Dessert was being served when the front doors opened. I looked up to see Jane, in a fitted navy dress and diamond earrings that caught the light. She walked in as if she owned the place, which, technically, she now did. "Richard Carter," she said warmly. "So good to see you again." He frowned, clearly trying to place her. "I'm sorry, have we?" Jane waved it off. "Business is such a small world. I just came to deliver this." From her clutch, she pulled out a large envelope and handed it to me. I slid it open and pulled out the deed. The room went silent. Richard stared at it, then at me. "What is this?" I laid the papers on the table so everyone could see. "The deed to this house," I said calmly. "I own it now." His laugh was sharp and incredulous. "Don't be ridiculous. I just sold it." "To Jane's firm," I interrupted. "She's my partner. We've been working together for months." The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mrs. Thompson's eyes were as wide as the crystal goblets. "Emily, you bought the house from your own husband." I met Richard's gaze. "Yes. And you'll be my tenant, Richard. If you want to stay." The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. The next morning, the house felt different. Not physically, it was still the same sprawling estate, but in the air. Lighter. Calmer. Mine. I found Richard in the kitchen, nursing a black coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair unkempt. He didn't look like the man who used to swagger through the halls, barking orders. "Morning," I said, pouring myself tea. He grunted. "We need to talk." "I agree," I said, pulling a folder from under my arm and placing it on the table between us. Inside was a tenancy agreement, rent, utilities, terms of stay. He stared at it like it was a snake. You can't be serious. I am. If you want to remain here, you'll sign. Otherwise, you have 30 days to vacate. You're really going to treat me like a renter in my own house? I smiled faintly. It's not your house anymore. His jaw tightened. You won't get away with this. I already have, I said simply. That afternoon, the staff, people who had once looked right past me, were suddenly deferential. Mrs. Carter, should we change the table linens this week? Mrs. Carter, would you like the roses cut fresh for the entryway? Every time they said Mrs. Carter, it felt different. Real. Not as Richard's wife, but as the owner. Even Richard's tone shifted. He still bristled, still snapped when frustrated, but now there was something else under it. Restraint. He was careful not to push too far. The strangest part? I still made him breakfast the next morning. Same eggs, same coffee. But when I placed the plate in front of him, I added a small slip of paper under the mug. Rent due, $4,500. Payable by the 1st. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, but his hand tightened on the fork until his knuckles turned white. If you want, I can now take us into Chapter 9 and Chapter 10, where Emily finally opens the locked study, uncovers the real dark secret, and delivers her final checkmate. That's where the central mystery and final power play land with full force. The key came to me without a fight. I'd found it in the top drawer of Richard's desk in the guest room he now used as his office. Maybe he'd grown careless. Maybe he thought I'd never dare. The heavy oak door to the study clicked open for the first time in years. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of cigar smoke and old leather. Dust coated the bookshelves. A single desk lamp glowed dimly over piles of papers. I closed the door behind me. At first, it was just what I'd expected: financial records, legal letters, contracts. But the more I looked, the more I saw patterns. Transfers of large sums to offshore accounts. Handwritten notes referencing land settlement payouts. A faded folder marked confidential caught my eye. Inside were newspaper clippings from 30 years ago. Headlines about a construction accident during the building of the Carter estate. Several workers had died. The official story had been faulty scaffolding. But tucked between the articles were statements from witnesses claiming corners had been cut on purpose by Edward Carter to save money. A crime. Covered up. The ledger in my attic made sense now. The debt-erased note? It wasn't about money. It was hush money, paid to the families to keep quiet. And Richard. Richard had been continuing the payments all these years to keep the truth buried. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned to find Richard standing in the doorway, eyes dark. "What are you doing in here?" I held up the folder. "Finding out who you really are." His gaze dropped to the papers in my hand, then back to my face. "Put that down." "No," I said. "This is what's been eating you alive, isn't it? Not just the money. The guilt." "There is no guilt," he said flatly. "Only survival." I stepped closer. "You're right. It's survival. Which is why I'm giving you a choice." His jaw clenched. "What choice?" "You tell the world. Confess what your father did, what you've done to keep it hidden. Or you keep your mouth shut and live here under my roof, paying me rent every month until you can't anymore." He stared at me, silent. For a moment, I thought he might choose confession just to spite me. But then he looked away. The next morning, Richard came to breakfast with the tenancy agreement in hand. His signature was scrawled at the bottom. "You win," he said simply, sliding it across the table. I took it without a smile. It was never a game. He gave a bitter laugh. "Everything's a game, Emily. You just played better." Life settled into an odd rhythm. Richard kept mostly to himself, working odd business deals I didn't ask about. Every month, his rent appeared in my account like clockwork. The staff followed my lead now, not his. The house felt different, warmer, lived in, mine. Sometimes, I'd catch Richard looking at me across the hall, as if still trying to figure out when exactly he'd lost control. But he never asked. And I never told him that the real victory wasn't the deed, or the rent, or even the house. It was the moment he realized that every step he took inside these walls was on ground I owned. On the first of the next month, I handed him his rent receipt. He didn't take it right away, so I set it on the counter between us. "Welcome home, Mr. Carter," I said softly. He looked at it for a long moment, then walked away without a word. And I smiled. Because I knew he'd never walk out that front door without knowing exactly whose house he was leaving. From wife to maid, to the woman who bought the house out from under him. If you loved this twist of betrayal and sweet payback, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because the next story might just make you question who's really in control.